Hey everyone, LouLombardi here, aka Loudini, with another interview series of the Loudini Rock and Roll Circus. Tonight's interview is a little bit different. I'm actually at a rehearsal space, so I'm not in my studio, so I'm a little bit out of my element. There are people walking around. It's a little crazy. But nonetheless, I have Betsie Brown on the line today. Betsie has over 25 years of experience in entertainment and music promotion, media relations, marketing, communications, based in Memphis, San Diego, New York, and London, like all over the place. Brown established Blind Raccoon in 2008 after a 7-year partnership with Crow's Feet Productions. They provide radio promotion, publicity services, social media promotion, and marketing consultation in the blues, roots rock, R&B, soul, Americana, and folk music genres. Betsie's recipient of the 2009 KBA Award Publicist of the Year, bestowed on her by the Blues Foundation. So that's a great accolade. Betsie, welcome to the Loudini Rock and Roll Circus.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Okay, so we were talking a little bit before we started the call here about where you're from originally, but how did you get started in the music business?
Good question. I've always done PR in some shape or form for many, many years in the corporate world. And a former boyfriend introduced me to the music of Howlin' Wolf and John Lee Hooker, and I realized that I'd really like to work in blues music. And so I sort of slowly transitioned from what I was doing into setting up a business to do just that. And that's what brought me to Memphis, Tennessee back in 2002. So it was basically, love lost love.
Okay.
Yeah, and one of the things was that I hadn't really understood what rockers were singing back in the 60s, which is when I was growing up in England, and it was sort of a full circle for me, sort of an understanding why I so much loved the music and hadn't figured out why.
Oh, okay, very cool. So this was able to get you to the roots of the music that you grew up listening to, and it's where you sort of started to put it together from there.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, okay. Because one of the questions I had for you was what makes you so passionate about blues and roots music? There are a lot of different people. Everybody I talk to in music PR has a niche that they are comfortable in. So you sort of answered that question. This comes from a relationship that you had. So that's cool.
Yes, and also I think for a lot of Europeans, and maybe for the English it's more R&B and soul, but I think we have a lot more interest in the music perhaps than folks that are here in the U.S. It's what's on your doorstep you don't appreciate nearly as much as what's sort of around, further afield. And I think there's a lot of that too.
So it's exotic to people. So people, because that was a really big thing. A lot of the, in the 60s, the Yardbirds, Led Zeppelin, the Jeff Beck group, Eric Clapton, and those guys, they embraced music that was really kind of like nowhere in America. Like people in America weren't tuning into it. And so you think that it's a sort of like the fact that it's kind of exotic?
Yes. And I mean, when I'm working with the international media and radio, there's a lot more enthusiasm and interest, and they really are like sponges. They soak everything up that they can possibly lay their hands on. Whereas, for us, it's just here, it's just around the corner. You don't go and see it every day because it's here. And this is one of the things about it that I so enjoy.
Okay, well then, this, so is it, do you find it like easier then to promote this type of music in, like these American artists that play this music? Do you find it easier to promote them in Europe and in England?
Yes, in Europe rather than in the U.S., yes.
Ah.
Yes, I wouldn't say easier. I'm not quite sure what the right word would be, but
okay.
Certainly in Europe and in Australia and in Southern America, I'm beginning to find, or should I say South America, the folks there, I don't know if it's because they don't have it on, they don't have American artists performing in those arenas that often. I mean, obviously in Europe it's a little bit different. But yes, I mean, when I present music to them, which now I typically do through a digital download system, I get a lot more interest, a lot more airplay, a lot more reviews than I would predominantly in the U.S. Obviously it depends who the artist is, but
right.
Yeah, that's what happens.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Blind Raccoon. What made you start Blind Raccoon?
Well, it was because I was in PR and I had the ability to sort of switch gears, and that's when I decided that I wanted to do what I call music marketing in the blues and roots world predominantly. And I just woke up one day and said, yeah, this is what I'm going to do.
Oh, so we just woke up and said, this is what I'm going to do. I have to ask you about the name, Blind Raccoon.
Yeah, you know, well, of course, when you're in the blues and roots world, you always have to have an animal, right?
Okay.
Like alligator records,
right.
fine pig or whatever. Mine was a raccoon because I had raccoons in my attic one time. And they are really difficult to get rid of. And I realized that the more I studied them, that they're really feisty buggers, and decided that that's what I needed to call my company, and that blind raccoons can live in the wild quite well.
I did not know that. I thought you were going to tell me something like, oh, it's a Howlin' Wolf B-side you've never heard.
No, oh, sorry. It came from personal experience.
I love it. That's great. So you've been working in this genre, the blues and roots genre, for a really long time. What can blues and roots artists do to better position themselves in the industry?
Well, I think it's like most musicians. It's really their creativity and their musicianship is, of course, the most important thing. But the business side of things is just as important, sometimes can be even more important, and this is something that folks have difficulty accepting sometimes, and also that you can't just have a budget for creating a piece of work. You then have to have a budget for putting it out there in the big wide world if you wish to have a career in the music business, regardless of what genre you're working in. And I think that's the biggest lesson that has to be learned. And then the next one is, do you want to be, quote, a weekend warrior, or do you want to be a full career musician?
So this is something that you're saying that the artist has to decide.
Yes. At some point or other, there has to be that decision made, because if you wish to be a full-time musician, you can't do anything else. And of course, that's the hardest thing, because so many have jobs. They're doing other things in order to get the bills paid, because being a musician is really hard to figure that one out. So, you know, that's the biggest obstacle that has to be overcome at some point or other.
How does somebody transition from, say somebody is a weekend warrior, but they really got the bug? They're really passionate. They write a lot. You know, they're accomplished on their instrument. They sing well, whatever. How do they say? Can you give any pointers for maybe the transition, or is that something you could talk about?
Well, you know, for them to be able to do that, obviously the first thing is they have to figure out where the money's going to come from for them to be able to do that. Right? I mean, that's the number one thing. And
right.
Of course, many musicians are very fortunate to have a support group to be able to do that. Then the next thing is, have they got enough gigs? Are they getting in enough income in order to be able to take that step? You know, as often as not, playing on perhaps a Friday night and a Saturday night is not quite so difficult, but trying to find 5 gigs a week, that becomes quite difficult. And finding a booking agent, because this is the one thing that a musician is seeking more than anything else, really.
Right.
At the end of the day, doesn't typically happen until you have a 6-figure revenue from gigs coming in.
Yeah, that's a big thing I hear from amongst a lot of musicians is we want a booking agent because nobody likes to book gigs.
Right, but you know, most of the time, unless you happen to be very unusual in the music or the presentation or whatever. I mean, it can be many different reasons why a booking agent will be interested, even if you don't have the gig revenue coming in. You've really got to do the slog yourself.
Yeah. So hear that, guys? Go out there and start slugging it out. Book them gigs. You want to try to see if you can get 5 a week. And
you've really got to be able to make that happen. And then, of course, you've got to produce original music.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And you have to record the original music. Then you have to manufacture the original music. Then you have to promote the original music. I mean, that's the bottom line. There really is nothing about being a musician that isn't business-oriented.
It's a good point. It's a really good point. So, when you work with a lot of artists, I was looking at your roster there. You work with a lot of artists, including some of my favorites, like Buddy Guy, who I just heard a new song by Buddy Guy on the radio. Born to Play Guitar. Is that it?
That's correct.
Yeah, I just heard that about 20 minutes ago.
Album.
Yeah. And so when you're looking at somebody to work with, what do you take into account? What kind of ways? What do you weigh out to see if somebody's a good candidate for you to work with or not?
The most important thing. This is going to sound hysterical. Well, obviously, the first most important thing is music.
Okay.
But I have to like the music enough to want to work it. That's got to be the number one, because obviously if I'm not into the music, then how am I going to work it successfully for an artist? But the second thing is, how professional are they? Do they actually attend a phone meeting on time? Do they communicate well? Do they have a business plan? Do they have a strategy? What are they thinking in terms of expectations? Do they understand the business? That sort of thing.
That's a great point, and that's something that, like, my audience, I was mostly independent artists, and I think that that's a great takeaway, because the sort of like cliche of the sort of like lazy musician gets up at the crack of noon, doesn't show up, is irresponsible and everything. That's just not going to cut it.
Well, I mean, I understand if a musician has been performing a lot and doesn't get up until 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Right.
That's not a big deal. However, if we have an appointment at 3 o'clock and it's a no-show, then I realize that that's not a good, it's not a good signal. It's definitely a red flag.
Yeah, well, and it goes to what you said. It's unprofessional. And you have to sort of be professional before you become professional in the terms of being paid professionally. You sort of have to walk into it with that attitude that I'm a professional, and if it's the meeting's at 3, we got to be there.
Yes, I mean, it is an important component for me to decide whether I want to work with somebody or not. I mean, it just is, and I think that may be also from my corporate days. That's perhaps how I think, and there may be others out there who do what I do that don't get so caught up in it. But it's a good indication, in my way, as to how the artist is thinking about what they're looking to achieve and how they're going to achieve it. And of course, I'm not always working directly with the artist. I don't work directly with Buddy Guy. I work with RCA, the label.
Right.
They're the ones paying me. So I deal with them, and of course in that sort of situation, they just let me get on with my job and do it, and everybody's hunky-dory, and off I go. It's actually a different type situation, because of course they're very business-like in their approach.
Of course. So speaking, you mentioned record labels. Do you see companies like Blind Raccoon and other talk by the half a dozen or more, maybe a dozen or so companies I've interviewed, sort of taking over some of what the record labels used to do, especially independent record labels?
Well, it's hard these days because labels do so many different things. So you can't look at one label and then expect another label to do the same thing.
Okay.
It just doesn't happen. So you can be looking at Alligator Records, that is just an incredible operation, very well run, has a great in-house team. They sort of do the nuts and bolts from A through Z, and they do it extremely well. Then you can look at another record label who is more like a vehicle for a distribution mechanism more than anything else, and they do a little bit of promotion on the side, and that's about it. So the thing is that when an artist is looking at labels, they really need to do their homework to figure out which might be a good fit for them, and then it is a question of building up a relationship. You know, an artist will often come to me and say, wow, I'm really interested in this label. And I'll go, well, okay, so how are you going to approach them? Well, I thought I'd just send in my CD and da-da-da-da. And most of the time, that's not how it works. You have to have a relationship with them. They have to be watching you, seeing how you're actually dealing with your professional life, how you're getting in the fans, how you're getting gigs, what you're doing in terms of your social media and promotion and all that sort of thing to determine whether they even want to work with you. So sort of just going in with a pitch when they don't know who you are is not going to work much in these days. Unless you happen to be like Gary Clark Jr. or somebody like that.
So in Blind Raccoon, do you sometimes do that? Do you sometimes take the artist who is unsigned and then maybe part of what you do you connect them with the record label, or is that not something you do?
Well, yes and no.
Okay.
It's a very soft approach.
Mm-hmm.
So what I will typically do is those labels that I really like, you know, I look at their operation and I see the artist who I'm working with, and I see that there would be a good synergy between them. I sort of introduce them. But any labels of note are always watching what I'm doing for artists because it's a good indication as to whether they would be good to take on in the future. So I've had a label come to me and said, yeah, you know, I really like this, what this artist is doing, and I'd very much like to meet them, and we do it that way. Typically, that's a much more successful way of seeing something happen down the road versus me doing the pitching.
Gotcha. Makes sense. What is the one thing that you would love to see change in the blues roots scene, or in the music business in general?
Well, you've put me on the spot.
If you don't have to, if you're uncomfortable with that, I don't
it's so funny because I think really in this day and age, we have the technology now to do everything digitally, right?
Right. So
I think my biggest key is the fact that so many folks are resistant to that, and they still want good old physical product. And I go, well, yeah, but why? You know, it's sort of just a very strange approach to me. I'm obviously old school in my age and everything, but you know, I look at the whole digital process and go, it's cheaper. It's if you've got a good storage mechanism, it's great. It's simple. It's straightforward. It's not really anything that requires an awful lot of thought. You don't even have to rip a CD because I've already done all the work for the media and for the radio, and yet they still want physical product in their hands.
Okay.
I think, you know, it is going to come a point where it's just going to get too expensive to deal with the mailing, with the postage and everything, you know, that goes with that. And, of course, when you're dealing with the international crowd, they realize that this is what they have to accept. Whereas here in the U.S., everybody's still very against the idea.
Well,
so that's one thing I would really like to see change. I think in terms of what goes on in the sort of general public and in the concerts and the gig level and all that sort of thing, that's a given. That's not much that we can change. It's a process.
Right.
It's something that's evolving, and it's something we just have to deal with. Obviously, I would love everybody to buy music left, right, and center, but that's something also that's changing. So, you know, that's something I can get involved in changing myself, but I could see more help or more progress made with the whole digital world.
If what you're saying is if like artists or the industry itself would, instead of, because it seems like people are fighting it still. You know, it still seems like you still see, you know, all the stuff about downloading, and you know, there was some flap about Taylor Swift a few months ago, and you know, mad at Spotify or something like that. And so, just to sort of clarify your point, you're saying like, hey, let's get on board with this. This is here, and this is the way to do it, and then let's put this other stuff behind us, and let's just move forward.
Yes, I do think, because I think it's here. So really, it's better that we figure out ways to make sure that it sort of works versus, trying to sort of constantly stop it.
Gotcha.
And what I'm saying is I like to buy a CD. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I just thought Joss Stone you one, and I wanted the CD. This is as an end user. I'm saying more in terms of what goes on in the actual industry. We should be able to do a lot more things digitally these days.
All right, folks, you heard it from the expert right there. Let's move forward. All right, Betsie, before we wrap up, is there anything that you would like to add, or is there anything you'd like to promote?
I think from my perspective, when I'm talking to artists, it's really to promote the idea that a budget doesn't just end from the from the point of view of creating the music. You have to build up a budget that also includes promoting the music and getting it out there. Of course, that's something you wish to do. And so it's really important to have a business plan, like anything else, to sort of take you through all phases of the album release. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. That makes total sense. It's not all, just because you did a great record and wrote a bunch of awesome songs and can play guitar really well, the other half of it is what are you going to do to get it out there? And yes. a lot of artists don't even but I think that they're getting smarter. I'm talking to more and more people. They're getting more savvy. They're starting to get a little more savvy about this. So I think there's some hope there.
The other thing I would say to any artist that's looking for somebody like myself is to make sure the bottom line is two things. To make sure that they're going with somebody who works the genre that they're in all the time. Mm-hmm. So if you're hip-hop, you go with somebody that works hip-hop. If you're blues, you go with somebody that works blues. And also to make sure that you hear the words, I love the music and I'd really like to work it for you.
Fantastic. That's awesome. Because if they're not behind the music, then they're not going to really be that excited about helping you. So that makes total sense. So how can people reach you, Betsie? How do people get in touch with you?
Just go to my website, blindraccoon.com. There
you are, blindraccoon.com. Betsie Brown, blindraccoon.com. Guys, go check it out. There's an amazing roster of artists there, and some very cool. So if you are a blues or roots artist and you're interested in purchasing some great services, I would definitely check out blindraccoon.com. Betsie, thanks a lot for talking to us today.
Thank you, Lou. I really appreciate it.
Okay, no problem. This is going to be the official end of the interview, but I want to ask you two questions off the record.
Okay.